Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the November 2nd, 2022 Technical Advisory Committee meeting. We'll go ahead and call to order this meeting. And our first agenda item is approval of the agenda. And so, Joe, if you can bring that up. Otherwise, if there's no objections, we will approve and move forward with the agenda as shown on the screen as soon as you show that, Joe.
It's sharing.
Nothing sharing yet. All right, folks. As you can see, most of the agenda today is wrapped around solicitation, with the exception of Maple Grove's program year extension for Rush Creek Boulevard. All right, not seeing any objections. The agenda is approved as is. Moving on to the October 5th tech committee meeting minutes. And Joe, if you just, yep, you got it up. I appreciate that. Folks, I would entertain a motion to approve the October 5th meeting minutes, unless there's any corrections.
This is Keel. I'd move approval.
All right, I heard Carl with a motion to approve. Is there a second?
Freeze was second.
All right, thank you, Lisa. All right, committee members, we have a motion and a second in front of us for approval of the October 5th, 2022 Planning Commission, or sorry, Technical Advisory Committee meeting minutes. Any other discussion? Not seeing any. All those in favor say aye by roll call. Joe?
McPherson?
Aye.
Robjent?
Aye.
Labrie?
Aye.
Ellos?
Aye.
Isaacson? Ryan? I think he'll be around, but Lisa, Freeze?
Aye.
Leitner?
Aye.
Witter?
Aye.
Kotsukos?
Aye.
Peterson?
Aye.
Larson?
Aye.
Harrington? Solberg?
Aye.
AO?
Aye.
Reef?
Aye.
Fighton?
Aye.
Pittaparthy? Eddie? DNR is vacant. McCullough?
Aye.
Keel?
Aye.
Howley?
Aye.
Omi is not here. At least he said he wouldn't be. Ellis?
Aye.
Kozlucher?
Brodegg for Kozlucher. Aye.
Thank you. Ashfeld?
Aye.
Thompson?
Aye.
Culver? Oh, you're not here. Mark Culver left, and now we have Ross Beckwith from West St. Paul in the seat. Are you here, Ross?
Yes.
Okay. Hager?
Aye.
Vol?
Aye.
Kurtz?
Aye.
And Dermody. Okay.
All right. Sounds like we have more ayes. So with that, meeting minutes are approved. We'll move forward. Next, Joe, this is normally the area where we would ask for any public comment on committee business. Joe, has there been anybody that's registered to speak to the committee today?
There has not, Chair.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Moving on next to the TAB report. Elaine?
Thanks, Chair. TAB met a couple weeks ago. Hovland reported that the executive committee reviewed the tab materials and emphasized that there would be polling during the regional solicitation presentation to reduce the scenarios for staff to bring back next month. He announced that Jeff Weissensell of Rosemont City Council was appointed by Metro Cities to fill the position that was opened when Gary Hansen was appointed by the Suburban Transit Association as their tab representative. Also, a Scott County project in downtown Prior Lake, funded through the regional solicitation, received a 2021 ITE Transportation Achievement Award for traffic engineering, and this project was highlighted in the September 2022 ITE journal. MnDOT and PCA did not have updates. For the MAC report, Crimmins reported that the airport is expecting 40,000 passengers for the MEA weekend the first day. Delta opened a direct route to Seoul, South Korea. And in March 2023, Delta will add a route to Japan. The Expo 2027 group toured MSP Airport to determine whether it could handle the capacity for attendees flying into MSP. Bloomington, Minnesota is a U.S. candidate for the 2027 Expo. Metropolitan Council report, Deb Barber reported on the groundbreaking for the Gold Line. That was that morning. The D-Line opening event will be December 3rd. And ridership numbers are at the highest monthly total since COVID pandemic began 2 years ago. For the Suburban Transit Association, Hansen reported that for Southwest Transit, Southwest Prime continues to grow. And Southwest Prime's Mall of America and airport service has grown to account for 20% of overall Southwest Prime ridership. Plymouth Metrolink Click and Ride on-demand service is nearly back to pre-pandemic levels. And they awarded a $15 million DOT raise funds for Station 73 Transit and Regional Improvement Project. MBTA ridership continues to grow, setting another COVID-era record in September. And year-to-date ridership is up 72% compared to last year. And compared to Southwest Prime, MBTA Connect continues to grow at record pace. And Southwest Transit and MBTA see unmet demand for services and are constrained by vehicle availability. For business items, TAB approved a streamlined tip amendment for Dakota County Minnesota River Greenway, a streamlined tip amendment for the Southwest Transit electric buses and charging station, and a streamlined tip amendment for Metro Transit electric bus purchase. An information item on an update by MnDOT and Anoka County on the Small Business ADA Initiative. And TAB member requested information be shared on the study of ADA deficiencies. Carrie Festug of MnDOT presented the Highway Safety Improvement Program information item. Let's see, and then the funding scenarios for the regional solicitation. TAB members were polled on several items to give staff direction on preparing scenarios to bring back for the November meeting. TAB members favored keeping the BRT rule to fund a maximum of 32 million BRT projects. They did not think it was fair to applicants to change the rules after applications were submitted. And TAB members discussed where to program extra funds in the transit modal category. Members favored shifting the funding to the bike ped category and roadway categories. For unique projects, TAB members indicated interest in funding only the TBI and 2 projects. This was done through polling. TAB members did not indicate where they wanted to shift the additional funds without knowing which of the 2 scenarios, the midpoint or the bike ped heavy, would be selected. And based on that, staff created scenarios on both of those. For carbon reduction funds, TAB favored selecting smaller projects, specifically mentioning funding the Safe Routes to School projects. And then under other, Hovland announced that Janet Williams, a TAB member from Savage, received the League of Minnesota Cities Award for Outstanding Public Service. And that's my report.
All right, thank you, Elaine. Any questions for Elaine on the TAB report? Especially maybe some of the discussion that TAB had regarding the regional solicitation.
Some of that might come out during the presentation of that. Those are the action items for that. But just to let you know that staff took TAB's comments from the polling and put them into the scenarios, which resulted in 3 scenarios.
Thank you, Elaine. All right. Appreciate the report. Moving on to committee reports, I'll just give a brief overview of the executive committee meeting. The executive committee did meet this morning. Brief discussion on the information item for today, which is the TAC chair nominations. I'll discuss that more in depth when we get to that after the other work we have to get through. But we also had a discussion regarding the regional solicitation project selection, maybe more specifically about an option that had come forward out of comments from the counties. And it just for, I guess, for the committee here, really what it did is it was trying to achieve what are the top priorities for specifically the counties and how that scenario could move forward. Unfortunately, the scenario was over the fiscal constraints that we're looking at by about 10 or 12 million. However, it did bring up some good questions that we'll address as we get into item 22-45. And so maybe I'll leave the rest of that until we get there. And with that, I don't know, any questions on that very generic report out? All right, not seeing any, we'll move on to planning committee. And Angie, I don't know, do you have anything you'd like to report out on that?
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you. I do have a report. Good morning, committee. I am the vice chair standing in for Scott Mareck today with a report from TAC Planning and the TPP Technical Working Group. So TAC Planning was canceled in October. TAC Planning has met once in the past 6 months, but really most of the items are being discussed at the TPP Technical Working Group with official business then coming to TAC Planning. So the group will be meeting on November 10th to act on the Metropolitan Airports Commission Capital Improvement Program. And then we had several items at the October 13th TPP Technical Working Group, 4 presentations from staff. So the first was a summary of the August advisory work group discussion. That is a policy level member group that meets. So there were discussion notes from that meeting. The summaries were made available. The group generally discussed the regional planning themes and focused on 3 of those specific themes. Then the next item was a progress report on review of the TPP policies. So that presentation included a summary of the themes heard from discussions to date and a description of the proposed phased approach for policy development. Work group participants discussed the need to transition to the more data-driven, outcome-based strategic regional investment framework, really to incorporate performance-based planning aspects. So that's still being discussed. I know that's been brought forward before as an ongoing item, but mostly the policy approach was discussed. Next, third item, there was a presentation on the council's draft climate action work plan. That is a document that's focused on internal planning and operations for the council. So that has gone through an environmental justice task force that has reviewed the plan and made recommendations. We heard about the specific MTS planning actions that are included in the plan. And then it is moving forward for approvals at this point through November and December meetings. The fourth and final item was a presentation on the draft Twin Cities Congestion Management Process, Congestion Analysis Handbook. The handbook provides guidance to stakeholder agencies to help implement the congestion management process to assess congestion problems and needs. It includes 4 steps and some really great technical guidance to walk through that process. So the next step on that is to finalize and release the handbook as a tool, and then it will be refined as needed. There are 3 items on the November 10th meeting, which are presentation and discussion on land use scenario planning, a presentation on the vehicle miles traveled reduction mode shift study, and pending availability and timing, an update on the travel demand management study. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Angie. Any questions for Angie? There's definitely a wealth of information coming through that committee, through the TPP Technical Working Committee. Just want to make sure folks get an opportunity to learn more about it. Extremely important committee, and we want to make sure that TAC members are fully involved and aware of the work that's taking place during those meetings and/or have access to the information. Not seeing anything right now, Angie. So yeah, all right. Not seeing anything, not hearing anything. Appreciate the report, Angie.
Great,
And
thank you.
with that, we'll move forward to item number 3, Funding and Programming Committee. Michael, did you want to introduce any of this, or are you turning it over to staff directly?
Well, I could do a brief introduction. If Joe wants to add anything, that'd be fine. So yeah, Maple Grove program year extension, $7 million awarded in a previous solicitation. So this is the Rush Creek 94 610 interchange project. And so really what this is just a 1-year program extension, mainly just working through federal authorization process, especially with the addition of the partial interchange. So the Maple Grove team presented to the committee. There were very few questions, and it did move forward with full support. So that's a brief intro, and I or Joe could stand for any questions.
All right, thank you, Michael. Joe, anything else to add on this?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'll add that part of the roadway, the program year extension policy is a scoring sheet performed by MnDOT Metro District. The score of 7 is supposed to be achieved in order to show that the project should be able to go within that 1 year, and they did score 8. So from that point, it was pretty successful. And with that, as Chair Thompson said, we'd stand for questions.
All right. All right. Any questions on this particular item for Michael or Joe? Otherwise, I'd entertain a motion to recommend that TAB approve Maple Grove's Rush Creek Boulevard I-94 Trunk Highway 6 to 10 interchange construction and Minnesota 610 extension, otherwise known as SP 189-143-001, be extended from fiscal year 23 to fiscal year 24.
So moved.
All right, thank you. I think that was Lisa.
Second, Joe Mack.
All right, and a second by Joe Mack. All right, committee members, we have a motion and a second in front of us to recommend, recommend the TAB approval of Rush Creek's, the Rush Creek Boulevard I-94 610 interchange construction and Minnesota 610 extension, otherwise known as SP 189-143-001, and that it be extended from 23 to fiscal 24. Any further discussion? Not seeing or hearing any. All those in favor say aye by roll call. Joe?
McPherson.
Aye.
Robjan.
Aye.
Labrie.
Aye.
Ellos.
Aye.
Isaacson. Freeze.
Aye.
Leitner.
Aye.
Witter.
Aye.
Kotsukos.
Aye.
Peterson.
Aye.
Larson.
Aye.
Harrington.
Aye.
Solberg.
Aye.
AO.
Aye.
Reef.
Aye.
Fighton.
Aye.
Pittaparthy. Eddie. McCullough,
Aye.
Keel,
Aye.
Howley,
Aye.
Ellis,
Aye.
Rodhaig,
Aye.
Ashfeld,
Aye.
Thompson,
Aye.
Beckwith,
Aye.
Hager,
Aye.
Vol,
Aye.
Kurtz,
Aye.
and Dermody.
Aye.
Right, motion passes. Item 22-44, move forward to tab in 2 weeks. Moving on to item number 22-45, which is again now our 3 funding scenarios to move forward to tab. And I'm assuming, Steve, you're going to go through this for us?
Yes, I am. Thanks, Mr. Chair. So again, today is an action item, and we'll go through what the recommendation from F&P is at the end of the PowerPoint here. So next slide. So this has a few more meetings to get through, the big one being November 16th at tab, and then we do ask for concurrence from our council. So December 14th is kind of the final concurrence date. We heard at this committee to put a little bit more bones, I think, behind kind of the explanation of the colors and color coding and what the tables mean. So we've done that since then, as we transition this from an info item to an action item. So that's been done, and kind of cover sheets with explanation and such. So I think that was helpful to other folks as well. Next slide. Elaine touched on this a little bit. 2 years of carbon reduction money that we're putting into this solicitation cycle. TAB's general preference was for the kind of smaller projects. Specifically, they mentioned Safe Routes to School several times, and kind of close to or fully funding that list out. So now we've reduced the carbon reduction options just to 1 based on that feedback. So as Elaine said, based on all this kind of direction we got from TAB, the list did change based on their direction. We funded more unique projects than was recommended by that scoring committee. So we had to, as a result, claw back some projects that were previously shown. So that's, that's TAB's discretion here. We asked them for direction, they gave it to us, and that changed the list. Next slide. So at this point, we're showing 3 different scenarios. A and B2 you've seen before, that being midpoint, the blue one. B2 was orange. The new one we added was a result of, we didn't get great concurrence on what to do with the extra transit money. Remember, TAB said follow that BRT rule and then transfer the remaining transit money to other modes. And we heard, well, if you do midpoint, maybe we'd want to shift that extra few $1 million to bike ped. But if you do bike ped heavy B2, maybe we'd want to shift that money back to roadways to kind of hedge the bet a little bit. So that's why we created B1, because we didn't get good direction, because the TAB wanted to see, well, what do we select for a scenario first, and then maybe we'll put the money, kind of flip the money to the other side based on that. So that's the pink scenario, is bike bed heavy, but the extra money is going to roadways. And it's not a ton of money. It's only a $3 million difference, and that's the extra transit money that was available to transfer. So I like to look at it as, if you go from A to B2, it's $11 million you're taking out of roadways. If you go from A to B1, it's only $8 million being taken out of roadways. So it's not quite in the middle, but it does kind of reduce that shift. Next slide. Here's that played out in more of a tabular form. Next slide. So the recommended motion coming from F&P, the TAC forward the 3 funding options to TAB, along with any key differences between the options and other technical feedback. So that's the motion before you. We want to go in now, Joe, into the table 1 of the key differences. Okay, we'll zoom in if we can here a little. Yeah, thanks. So this is in the action item PDF, so a separate PDF than the presentation. So last month at TAC, we talked about a pros and cons list, and it was kind of tough to come up with pros and cons. So we transitioned a little bit to more of a key, what are the key differences? So if we want to tell TAB, how do you think through these scenarios and kind of think about what differentiates them? That's what we started to do. And as we work our way down this table, we have the number of projects by category. Then we have local dollars leveraged after the kind of shading. And then we start thinking about other things we've called out in the tables. Projects that are resubmittals, either they've applied 2 or 3 times or more before. Equity bonus projects, how many of those did we get? Safety high scores in the roadways. Then we also put in there the monetized safety benefits. That was one of the, just in the roadway projects, but what is the, if you add up all the monetized safety benefits of all the projects in each of the options, what does that get you from, and at least in the roadway side? Intersections impacted, and this was relative to a comment about ADA at TAB. And then finally, kind of the number of different counties with investment or different applicants that are funded. The last kind of 3 rows in there. So if there's other things that people want to put forward, that would be good. We can, excuse me, add to this table as it goes to tab. But then maybe if we could just scroll down a little bit, Joe, to the actual options. So again, here's the blue and the orange like you've seen in the past, and we put, because pink was kind of in the middle, we nudged it right in between blue and orange here as kind of the maybe a middle ground between the two for TAB to consider. So that's what's shown there, and we kind of walked through all what the different colors are. We did have a little conversation at F and P, particularly on the bridge. And maybe let's go to that slide. Next slide here, or next page, Joe. Right, we got direction from TAB to fund that 5th bridge project in there. And so it's caused a little bit of a confusion, to tell you the truth. And we have $4.5 million per year, so we have enough bridge money to fund all 4 of those. Previously, the money we thought was available in 23 and 24, so we couldn't do a new bridge project from this list. There's just, there wasn't time to develop a new federal project. So we had put it on past selected bridge projects and kind of swapped out the money that way and put more into the solicitation. Once we found out from MnDOT that we had more flexibility on the years, that allowed us to fund all 5 of the bridge projects with bridge money, so that makes sense. But we'd already spent the money. We had already spent that last $5.5 million. And that money's coming out of the roadways allocation. So if you look at the modal splits total, that 5th bridge project is coming out of roadways. So if you add up, now if you kind of add up all the money that we have available across all the funding pots and modes, we do have a little bit of a remainder, and that's shown in yellow at the bottom of this page. And maybe Joe can just zoom in slightly on that one. And this was what we talked a little bit about at F&P. So you have 2.3 million, 3.5. So if you wanted to kind of use the bridge money just for the bridges and kind of clear that up a little bit, I'll say we're pretty close to being able to do that. And you'd go back and put that money in roadways, but theoretically that money could go in any mode. It's not dedicated there, but if you wanted to kind of get that full $5.5 million back in roadways, you probably have to overprogram by another, this is the yet to overprogram to get to 11%. If you wanted to drive that kind of back closer to that 5.5 million, you'd have to probably do 12% over programming. And so that's, I know we talked a little bit about that at TAC Executive. So I think with that, Mr. Chair, I'll turn it back to you. And so some of the key things we want to get out of today are there other key differences between this scenarios or other technical feedback that you want to provide to TAB in their decision making? And then, John may have some other kind of points that he wants to bring up, whether it's kind of there are people kind of leaning one way or the other, and maybe that's something that would be helpful from a TAB perspective. So, John, let's maybe turn it back to you. I'm sure there's questions on where we're at and where you want to go here.
All right, thank you, Steve. And just to be clear, so right now, 3 scenarios. And we have how much unallocated at this point?
Yeah, somewhere between 2.3 million and 3.5 million.
Okay, and that's at 11% over program.
Yep. So you don't have to use that money.
Right.
We could just reduce over programming. And
Mr. Chair, can I ask a question about the bridge money one time?
Yeah.
Mr. Linden?
Go ahead, Lyndon.
I'm still pretty confused by that, Steve. My understanding was there was 20.2 million of bridge funding available for this round of solicitation. Did I hear you right that you've already spent 5.5 of it? So there's actually only 14.7 or whatever you show there of on-system bridge money in this solicitation?
yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair and Lyndon. So let me slow down and maybe try and explain this a little bit. So when we first learned about the on-system bridge program, we have enough money. We actually have $22 million available of bridge money between those years, but only 20.289 million of projects. And so MnDOT has asked us to hit over time, hit that target of roughly $4.5 million per year. Originally, the money came out and it was in 23, 24, 25, 26, 27. There wasn't enough time to pick any of these projects. When we asked any of these project sponsors, could you develop and have federally authorized a new bridge project in 23 or 24? No one said yes. So, just like any of these big projects, it takes, you're years out from being able to deliver most of them. So then we thought we had to use money, this 23 and 24 money on bridges. So we went back to the last solicitation and looked at the bridge projects selected in that solicitation that would be federally or would be eligible to accept that money. We were going to put those 2 years of bridge money essentially into those past selected projects, and then that by virtue free up other STP money that could go into the broader solicitation to be selected in the later years. And so that was the general approach to get around the year issue. As we kind of worked through it a little bit with MnDOT, they said they could give us some flexibility on the years. So after we're into these scenarios and had done that, we learned that MnDOT can be the banker a little bit. For it's a small amount of money. They'll use the STP money and give us the money in the years that we can use it for these bridge projects on this list. So TAB directed us to fund the 5th bridge project, but we had already allocated the money to other projects in the solicitation. And so that's why I'm suggesting if you want to go back and kind of clean that up, you could use this extra money to get you there or close to being there, to say, okay, all the bridge money, kind of from a pure standpoint, we're putting it all on the bridge, and all the roadway money and the modal allocation we're putting on roads. So that's kind of the series of events that took place to get us to what you're seeing on the screen.
Okay, follow up to that, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Lyndon.
So you said there was 22.2 million. You've allocated 5.5 to previously selected bridges. And my understanding is that previously selected bridges came out of the road mode, right? So to be fair, you would think you'd put that money back in the road mode. So still, are we talking about if it's 22.2 minus 14.7 you show here, that equals 7.4. I'm not getting the math on this 2.29 that's available. Isn't there a little more than that could go into the road mode?
Yeah, Mr. Chair and members. So the remainder, we have 22 and change available. But when MnDOT told us that we had the flexibility, we didn't spend that last 2 million on anything. It's still out there, and the next solicitation we'll to hit that target, long-term target, we'll go back and we'll do more bridge funding next cycle, probably on the order of 4.5 million per year times 2, so 9 million plus another 11+ million in bridges to kind of hit that long-term target. So the money just we didn't spend it anywhere the last 2 million.
Yeah, it seems like I don't recall a debate on whether we should prioritize, funding all the bridges or putting more money into roads. My recollection in the past is TAB set aside a $10 million minimum. It used to be 7, then went to 10, and now we're at 20. But I don't remember talking about, is that appropriate to fund all the bridges, or is there a road project that's more important? Seems like if everyone had known there would be a lot more money in bridges, you may have got more applicants. So I'm a little concerned that we didn't have that discussion and that the roadways took other ramifications of not talking about that. Thank you.
Yep.
And I can respond to that.
All right, Elaine.
Yeah, TAB had that discussion. Initially, only 4 bridges were indicated with the bridge money, and TAB asked staff to consider the 10 million that they had allocated and add the bridge money on top of that. So since there was only about 5.5 million left for a bridge, that project was added. And that was at TAB's direction.
Okay.
Yeah, but I thought TAB was told that all the bridges were getting funded with the on system, the new money.
No, what they were initially saw was the 4 bridges, and then there was some interim color changing, but TAB never did see all 5 of them, I think, as new bridge money. Am I correct, Steve?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, Mr. Chair, this is Joe. I got a question on that.
Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
So Steve, with this new table here, looking at the modal split project total, so that 167,571, is that taking into account the 14.7 of on-system bridge funding? So that's part of the roadway group?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair and Joe. So the modal splits spending only includes that 5th bridge.
Okay.
Yep. So that's why we got one comment here to change the color coding on that 5th bridge, so people kind of clearly knew that $5.5 million was coming out of the roadways target allocation.
Okay. So then just to reiterate, Mr. Chair, follow-up question.
Yep, go ahead.
So the funding that you mentioned earlier, I appreciate the history on that. So there was already funding put back towards previous bridge projects, exchanged out, and then that funding was put back into the overall funding scheme. So if it was, let's say it was $10 million, the 55% went to roadways, and I'm just throwing a number out there, and then you got your 14.5% or whatever the next funding is for transit, and then so on for bikes and peds. Is that how that was divvied out?
Correct. Yeah. So it didn't flow directly back into roadway projects. I think that's where Is that your question?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
you're right. Correct on that. Yeah.
Thank you.
More questions on this particular item?
Mr. Chair, this is Carl.
Yeah,
So
go ahead.
the yet to program amounts are relatively small to meet an 11% over programming. Am I reading this right to say that if we didn't program those dollars, we'd be at like 10% over programming?
That's fair to say. Yep.
And could you remind me what our logic is around over programming and what number we ought to be shooting for? This doesn't include any of the new ACT money as well, right?
I'm sorry, I missed that last part. Any of the
This
what?
doesn't include any of the new federal dollars that we may get from IIJA or whatever it is.
Yeah, so
Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, should I jump in here?
Let's see.
Okay. Yeah, so Mr. Chair and Carl, so in the past, we've overprogrammed at times up to, that 11%. This overprogramming is still 11%, but it's based on more money, includes that IIJA money. So the dollar value of the overprogramming is, instead of like 10 million a year, it's more like 13 million a year. So it's still that 11%. And then, we had a little discussion at TAC Executive about, from a dollar value, that may be, I'm guessing a little high, but at the same time, we're funding more projects. So that maybe there's more propensity that some of it's going to come back. So I guess you could argue kind of both sides of that.
Yeah, and Steve, historically, we've been at about the 10 and 11%.
Yeah.
And so, Carl, I think that's a point I want to get to maybe a little bit later on. If we're with the additional funds and just the number of projects, right? There is a higher potential of projects pushing back, and really also being able to move forward. So something to maybe consider here is one, do we program that additional 2.1 to 3.5 million? Do we so go back to say strict 10%, or do we look at the size of the program and accept some additional risk and maybe move to maybe a 12% over programming, which again, maybe another 3 million total in this, but that could then go towards, and what I've heard some discussion of is maybe more towards roadway or more towards bike ped, depending upon the flavor that you're interested in. So something here for TAC to really provide some feedback to TAB on as this moves forward. Carl, did you have anything else you wanted to say?
No, thanks for that discussion. I appreciate that. So what I'm hearing is that if anything, we may be in a position where we want to argue for a higher amount of over programming rather than a lower amount, which I appreciate. And then the only other observation I would make is, we're kind of in a inflation-ridden environment currently, and I know we don't program contingencies into things, but and I just say that as an observation. I don't have any direction based on that.
Thanks, Carl. Brian?
Yeah, Steve, can you anchor us in where we are in the ranges for the typical categories? Like how much are we into roadways? How much are we into transit, and how much are we into bike ped?
Joe, if we go back let's go back to the PowerPoint, slide 5. Now one more down. Yep. So those, are you asking about, Brian, the percentages or the dollar value, or both? Maybe?
The percentages is where I was going. I mean, I think, we're in the margins here, and I've said this to others. There's not a lot of difference between any of these different scenarios. I think they're all within the historic ranges, right? Maybe one is slightly over. but others have been significantly higher in the past, so that's probably on balance not a big deal. Is there anything that tells us about different outcomes? And I apologize that I wasn't here when you were going through your presentation, Steve. So if I'm already trodden ground, go ahead and tell me to be quiet. But
Yeah, Mr. Chair and members. So that table 1 key differences between the funding options is one area, particularly the lower half of that table, where we get at some of the outcomes, at least from a safety perspective, equity bonus, local dollars leveraged, ADA intersections impacted. So kind of right below the gray shading. Those are based on what people submit in their applications. That there's a few things we were able to draw out.
I see. Yeah.
Yeah. There's some differences. I mean, they're not great differences. Because we're only talking about a change of a couple projects in each scenario, this way or that way. But there,
right. That's where I was going.
You can say, hey, maybe I really like this scenario because of the safety benefit or the ADA stuff, or more applicants are funded. You can make an argument, I think, based on a few things there.
Yeah. So I'll just say, in my head on what our role is in this setting, because there aren't a lot of differences. Like, I think it's going to be hard for TAB to discern which way to go, and then they're going to be in the place of trying to argue the merits of one project over another when we have really dozens of projects that we're trying to fund. And so the degree to which we as a committee can point to things that would differentiate and would make sense from a regional perspective, like let's say that even in the bike ped heavy, there's not a lot more projects, but certainly TAB tends to look at these as mainly a regional issue in terms of how well the map looks when we're done. But I think when we think about what does it accomplish, that's where my head's at. And so if we can speak to some of those things, like maybe to Lyndon's point, if we pushed more towards roads, then maybe we would see, I don't know, better pavement condition on the A minor system. Maybe in the current mindset of how people are traveling, bike ped heavy makes more sense, with people staying more localized and a greater percentage of people being remote than have ever been. But just a couple of thoughts.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Looks like Joe, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just going back to the overfunding or overprogramming discussion there, and then also, Steve, when you were going through your presentation, you had mentioned that one of the items that TAB was looking at was the unique projects and how many of those projects get funded. I started taking some notes down, but I've got incomplete notes here. So were you saying that there might be some additional money that was set aside for unique projects that's unallocated, that maybe you could combine that with the proposed 11% overprogramming, or maybe if the group is comfortable because of the number of projects, the number of funds here, not leaving state aid holding the bag, trying to reallocate funding when things drop off, maybe we overprogram at 12%, add in that additional money from the unique projects that isn't spent, then you have a little bit more money. Did I hear that correct?
Yeah, Joe, maybe you can go to slide 12 of the PowerPoint. Making your earn your paycheck here today, jumping between all these things. Good job. So this is the polling question on unique project that we asked of TAB and how they ended up kind of doing the straw poll. So we only have $727,000 left on unique projects for reallocation. So
okay, thank you.
That's where we're at on that one. Yep.
All right, Steve, and just trying to work through a little bit again for greater understanding. Currently at this 11%, we have that range of 2.1 to 3.5 million left unallocated, and then 727,000 in unique projects. That's not allocated. And so feels like a couple pieces there. Again, we could, and depending upon level of comfort over programming, that could be provided as feedback to TAB on these various scenarios, whether that's making, instead of an $8 million take from roadway, maybe making it, well, I suppose it could be anywhere from 3 million to almost 8 million. Feels like if we went to a 12% over program. So,
Yeah, I get you.
well, and I just want to call out, right? Brian has called this out, I think, a couple of times. These are not big differences necessarily in these projects. And my interest is really providing something that the policymakers can get some additional feedback from TAC, and whether that's the number of projects that might meet some priorities, or whether, as Brian said as well, I mean, it would be ideal if we had some measures to which we knew midpoint is gaining us 2% more in pavement quality or bridges out of poor condition, but we don't really have that right now. And so one of the other areas I was thinking about from tax perspective is I would like to do a straw poll, if you will, of TAC to gauge where do the professional technical folks see unofficial, right? Their preferences in these three options moving forward. Because if everybody lined up and it was a third, okay, it doesn't really maybe tell TAB that much. But if there was more of a preference towards, I don't know, A and B2, okay, well then they could drop, that might narrow their focus to those two alternatives, and they can battle it out in a 4-hour meeting, or vice versa. So some things to think about there. But before we get there, maybe we still want to tackle these kind of over programming decisions or discussion moving forward. And I recognize folks want to look at the carbon as well, and there's some discussion there that I think we'd like to have based on what is the Met Council's ability to spend beyond the 2 years that the Transportation Committee and TAB recommended kind of moving forward with, as the dollars are programmed throughout IIJA. What is that possibility? Might that make a difference in an alternative as well? So hate to add more decision points in this, but it is complicated, and I'd like to bring some more of those pieces. So let's see, Joe, do you have your hand up again, or Brian? One of you two, I see hands up. So hopefully I didn't make that too complicated, but I'm just trying to get to a point where, from a TAC perspective, how are we informing TAB when, as I even look at this, like I don't know how I would pick one other than maybe if I have an incentive to advance ADA in the region, right? There's maybe two that are more clear winners than the third, or safety. So
Aaron, Jenny, and I all have our hands up. Can we tick through the hands of folks that haven't kind of gone through and asked questions?
Yes, absolutely. So Lisa, why don't you go ahead? I'm having a hard time seeing hands up here. So okay.
So just a proposal here, and I know, so the county has met and talked through some of this, and what we were kind of coalescing under is potentially a reasonable expectation out of TAC today is to narrow this to 2 to TAB. And so I just want to plant that seed in people's heads if they're feeling like they could get there. But with some of the discussion on the over programming, the proposal I'm thinking of is looking at the summary table, and, I do recognize, I appreciate this table. I think, based on us kind of harping, we need to get to a better point of figuring out some metrics. And I think Met Council has heard us loud and clear on that. But with what we have at the data at our fingertips right now is like, this is what we've got. And so looking at this, to me, it's somewhat clear that B1 alternative is showing the highest numbers in most of these categories. But thinking about that over programming question with the bridges is that I'm wondering if we drop B2, and with that over programming, we put that over programming. So I know I'm looking at my screen, I'm looking at this. So in the multi-use trails bike facilities, the only difference between B1 and B2, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but the only difference I'm seeing between B1 and B2 is that Scott County project in the multi-use trail and bike facilities. And so if that really is the only difference, and once again, I've scrolled through this 1,000 times and I could be missing something. So if that is the only difference, let's drop B2 and use that over programming to get ourselves to 11, 12% and fund that that Scott County project. Now, we're obviously dealing with a tie there now with that Hennepin County situation. But so that's my suggestion, and I just wanted to plant that seed, is that can we get rid of B2 if that's not truly doing much different for us? Focus on then that A scenario, B1, and then with that over programming, try to pick up that Scott County project. And I think partially recognizing, I think this is the only Scott County project in the mix. I could be wrong on that one too. So anyway, not a question, just a suggestion for folks to noodle on here as we're going through this.
All right, thank you, Lisa. A good note there that really minor differences, and if we are interested in over programming, that might be a solution to get rid of an alternative. With that, I'm going to go just because it's in order on my screen. Aaron, I don't know if you raised your hand first or not, but.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, I just want to make a comment in that when we're looking at where to program the additional transit money, as well as some of these other additional funds like the over programming, that regional balance be taken into consideration when you look at the comparisons by county for populations and jobs. There's still some discrepancies as to where that funding is going. So that is one request I would make, is that that be taken into consideration when we're looking at where to put these extra funds.
All right, thank you, Aaron. If we can go to that just before I get to you, Jenny, to show that regional balance where we're sitting right now. Joe. And a good piece there that Tab is always very interested in is where do those regional balance numbers come out. And so here you can see the numbers in 22, and I'm assuming, Aaron, that maybe I'm wrong in this, that maybe Dakota County is a little lower, but than you normally would be. But
well, yeah, I think consistently we are. I mean, you look at 2014 through 2020, our percentage is pretty low compared to jobs and population.
Okay. All right, so folks, keep that in mind as we continue discussions. Jenny?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have just a couple comments and then a question. I think I would second what Lisa was explaining in terms of trying to make B1 look a little bit more like B2 and try and get down to that Scott County project. I think that would be a strong scenario to put forward for TAB. I have a comment too on the metrics. I guess I'm not understanding why we would monetize and calculate the safety benefit for roadway projects only. I think that is a skewed perspective. And if we are able to do a full calculation across all of the different categories, I think that's what should be presented to TAB. And then I have a question, Steve, maybe for you. Could you please explain why in A, we're funding an extra transit expansion project, a pretty low scoring transit expansion project that's not funded in the other two scenarios?
Yeah. Okay.
Good, Mr. Chair and Jenny.
Go
Some
ahead,
good,
Steve.
good questions and comments there. So first, let's start with your last question. So why are we funding? So the midpoint does not transfer any of the money out. In particular, the bike ped, it was a $5 to $6 million shift from A to either B1 or B2, and so that's the difference between the scenarios. And so with that extra $5 to $6 million, you are able to fund the last project on the transit expansion list, where you can't in B1, because how we built that scenario was shifting both roadway and transit money in the pink and the orange over to bike ped. And so that's the difference.
So, Mr. Chair, follow up.
Go ahead,
I
Jen.
guess that to me doesn't align with what TAB asked for. I didn't hear TAB kind of state that they wanted to have a scenario that followed those strict rules. I heard them talk about, well, there's extra money in transit and we're split on whether that should go to bike ped or roadways. So to me, I'm struggling with A, because I don't feel like it's aligning with where TAB was wanting to go.
Elaine, you want to jump in here, and then I can answer the other safety question after that.
They left the midpoint scenario as it was, and it was the extra funding in the other there was only at that time one other scenario, and that was what they looked at, and it was to have something different beyond the midpoint. So the excess funding was beyond what's in that midpoint scenario, was what they were looking at. Should we put it someplace else? They did not say to change the midpoint scenario.
Yeah. So let's go back to that. If there's nothing else on that, let's go back to the metrics question for a second. So right now we've only done the monetized safety benefit for roadways because that's what our measures are asking for. There is safety calculations in some of the bike ped. We don't monetize it because there's very few, they're more random in nature and very few of them, especially in a 3-year time window. We could look if that was indicated in the application and kind of do the math. I think that's possible. That there may be some locations that probably were that did have bike ped crashes where we're going to make an improvement. But it's largely based on, that was easy data in the roadway applications. So let's look into that, I guess. And the other things that we monetized, if you wanted to kind of further play it out, if, delay reduce is something to roadways. The emissions, CMAQ emissions are something we that are measured at least in some of the categories, but not all of them in roadways and transit. Emissions reduce. So that, there's a couple other ones that we do have quantitative figures that we could add if people thought that would help. Like transit for safety, we don't really, there isn't corollary. So we might be able to add bike ped, but it wouldn't include any of the transit projects. But are they reducing crashes? Likely not. Unless it's a shift of people. I guess you could play it out a little bit, but we don't have it in the application at this point.
Jenny, follow up on that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do think that if there's other metrics like greenhouse gas emissions and that kind of thing, that, climate is important to TAB. If that can be shown on the list and the table, I think that would be very helpful. So, thank you.
Yeah, greenhouse gases, I think we're a cycle, just to follow up quickly, Mr. Chair, I think we're a cycle away from showing that. We only are measuring that in transit expansion in the TDM projects right now. But that's kind of Tony Fisher's study that's just starting up right now, is to be able to measure that across the scenario. So I think we're probably a cycle away from that.
Okay, looks like Joe, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just going to add, to make it as simple as possible for TAB members to just refer to a few items, because I know we're technical folks and we like to kill people with information. I think one thing that'd be beneficial is in this comparison table. I think it'd be good to show what the proposed
funding percentage is, and maybe even the number, so it's all in one place.
Mhm.
I know that's already in the tables themselves and the funding tables, but I think it'd be beneficial to show it here for comparison. Thanks.
Okay. Yep, that's easy enough. We've got it done actually too, so that's
All right. I apologize if folks are not getting picked on in the order that they came up. I'm just seeing them scroll across as I move. So I have Lisa.
You know, I kind of question too, like Jennifer, maybe we should move that one transit project off. And I know the midpoint scenario and move that over to bike ped. It just seems like that could free up or kind of eliminate some discussion that is really not necessary. I think we've all concluded that we're funding a lot of the transit projects, and that might be probably the weakest one of the various scenarios. And there's been some discussion about that amongst probably the benefiting agencies. And I think generally we're comfortable with that the transit projects that people wanted to get funded are getting funded. That might help TAB in their discussion if we could do something like that.
Okay. Thank you, Lisa. All right. Lyndon.
Yeah, just a general follow-up. I kind of agree with what Lisa said, and that was kind of our point when the counties got together, because we didn't really have a midpoint scenario, a second midpoint scenario that we could play with. We just had these two were ped bike heavy, so we try to figure out what was, a high priority for the counties that maybe were on the bubble, and Dakota County had a road project. So again, back to the road numbers. I mean, seems like with that bridge discussion, some of this over programming, I would be in support of adding more money to the road category, because that's where it's been taken away from. I mean, go back to that slide 5 that shows the mode ranges.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, we got a lot more money, but I just don't think unless the demand is not there, I don't think any mode should get less than the middle of the range. So that's kind of what we focused on. So yeah, if that, transit is almost 100% funded, maybe there's one project that we talked about. If that went away, could that money be reallocated to a trail or a road project combined with the over programming that might get to a Dakota County project based on that regional balance, which I think is important for TAB to know. The Scott County Trail and the Dakota County Road project would shift regional balance to a more equitable situation. But I'm in big support of the midpoint, but maybe with a slight tweak on how that transit money is allocated. And of course, that brings up debate, and that's why we started talking about it as the counties. Is you could also, maybe tweak a couple of the PED projects that are lower on the scoring list. I'm not talking trail, I'm talking PED and Safe Routes to School. I think Safe Routes to School was popular with TAB. I'm not sure they totally understood what we were talking about, but they seemed to like those because they were schools. But there's a way to maybe trim from the other PED category to make this work as well, and hence us noodling on this other hybrid scenario.
Yeah.
Okay. Chad?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just want to show support for what Lisa came up with, maybe doing away with B2 and combining a little bit more into B1 with some extra over programming and using up funds to get down to that Scott County Trail. The other thing, and maybe this is I'll make one more point and then a question. The other point, following what Jenny said too about the transit project, given the scoring of that is in question to go all the way to the bottom, maybe that could be used differently. And then maybe this is just the color coding, but I think TAB should be aware too on that midpoint. We have this carbon reduction funding and none of it is necessarily shown as going towards bikeways and trails, which I feel like has the greatest ability to reduce carbon. I think Safe Routes to School are great, and they were very supportive from a safety standpoint, and some of the pedestrian as well. But I think carbon reduction has a good chance. So I think it would look better if there was green under the midpoint scenario. And then lastly, is the midpoint scenario, is extra going towards bike ped, or is it just the midpoint scenario? I'm kind of looking at the terminology there because I got confused during the conversation, but it just sounds like there's a midpoint. Mm-hmm. What was the extra? Maybe that's the question that went to make it extra towards bike ped. Thank you.
I'll go back to that table. Table 5.
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead, Lenny.
Doesn't that answer his question here?
Yeah, so what the extra is the extra transit money in the scenarios that Tab said to reallocate. And so what extra means is that extra $3 to $4 million is going either to bike ped or to roadways, depending on whether you're A, B1, or B2 here. That's the extra. And Tab did give us some indication on how to use that carbon reduction money. Maybe we kind of overdid that a little bit because we kind of went, we really shifted it. But we, John, I guess you were there too as the tech chair. They seem to like, especially the Safe Routes to School projects, and that's what they got them talking about, smaller projects, and whether that means kind of do all of it there or kind of do a little of each. Maybe we didn't dig deep into that question. I don't think we did, but we certainly heard Safe Routes to School.
Yeah, Safe Routes to School was a big piece, and I think if I were to characterize the comments, there was a lot of support for the mode of bicycle and pedestrian facilities. There was not a lot of definition on what funding category that should go to, if it should go more towards trails or pedestrian facilities. And so, right, and that again could be a caveat, a comment from TAC here that, it really should, thinking to Chad's comment of you may get more greenhouse gas, or, I don't know how we categorize that, but a larger reduction based on trails rather than maybe I don't know, some street improvements or something. So and this is where I knew we were going to get into the mud on this, so I guess more on that in a little bit. I want to make sure I'm getting through the names here. Chad, did you have anything more?
That answered my questions. Thank you.
Okay, Danny?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just like to, I guess, third or fourth the support for Alyssa's comment. I think B1 and B2 are so similar. It would be really great, I think, to get that Scott County project in there. It is a multiple resubmittal. I think it's been submitted multiple times. And I also want to add how it performed against the other applications in that category. It had a pretty high score when you look at some of the funded projects in other categories. I know that's a little bit comparing apples to oranges, but again, it did score well. It was like a 700 and something, low 700s, and it is a resubmittal. It had a lot of other things going for it, so it'd be great to get that in there because I feel like we're really close, and if we could use some over programming to do that, and in addition, get the Washington County or Dakota County project in there for some regional balance, because I think keeping them that regional balance is important to them. I did watch the TAC meeting online, and I heard Safe Routes to School and bike ped and some support for road as well. So if there's a way we can do all those things and get some regional balance, I think that would be great. So that's all I have. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Danny. Carl?
So I was going to add a fifth to Lissa's idea of combining the two. And I do like the idea of adding the Scott County project to the B1 scenario. So I do like that. And then I would just note that, and I know the comment was made that from a greenhouse gas point of view, bike ped is probably a better option. I don't know if that's true. I would think that the volumes on roadways are much, much higher, and any reduction in congestion would probably overcompensate. So I just question whether that statement is true.
Okay, thanks, Carl. All right, go back to my sheet here. Elaine.
I wanted to add on to a couple. TAB did recommend using smaller projects. I mean, along with the Safe Routes to School, which is where the pedestrian projects went. And then the other comment I had is when you're looking at deciding not to fund lower ranking projects, you can't just pick out one category. So you don't look at just transit expansion, because if you say that, that would wipe out funding the lower ranking projects and the pedestrian and Safe Routes to Schools also.
Say that again, Elaine.
So, I mean, there's been focus on not funding the lowest ranking transit expansion project because it's the lowest ranking. But then we were also right now selecting projects lowest ranking on the Safe Routes to Schools and pedestrian. You can't just select one category and say we don't want to fund the lowest. It has to be a statement across the board. And again, TAB has had some discussion. I don't know if there are transit representatives here, but there are on the TAB who would probably fight against removing another transit project if they went to that midpoint category. Because it would lower, because right now I think Steve's showing, even with the midpoint category, it's 29% of the funding, so it's already below that 30%, and it would drop it even further. So there has been some discussion on not going too far out of that range.
Okay. All right, Elaine, Charlie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was wondering if we're talking about looking for metrics and how to, compare and contrast the options. One metric that I don't see in table 1 that might be a good idea is percent of need. When you look at the different categories and the total project cost, some of the roadway and strategic capacity projects, I mean, they cost so much money, it's hard to get anything done without getting support, without getting funding support. So I think to Lyndon's point, money was taken out of roads. Maybe that's where it should go back. But I'd like to see the metric considered for a percent of need. And then lastly, I agree combining B1 and B2 somehow might make the decisions a little easier. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
Yeah,
Adam.
Mr.
Oh, go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I was just quickly to the question here. Bethany did put together from our staff the percent of need in one of the other charts in the packet, so it would be easy enough to pull that forward into this table. Seems like we want kind of a one-page, one-stop shop where all the relevant information is all together here, based on kind of Joe McPherson, what Charlie just said, and so there's a few things we can do here. Thanks.
Yeah, a quick suggestion on that, Mr. Chair. I agree.
Go ahead.
I agree. The one pager is really helpful. The total cost, by mode, the total demand, I guess you could ask. I know transit's a little off because it doesn't include the BRT total cost, but having that number in there, I mean, we're looking at roadway projects, 900 million in demand. I mean, these are big numbers. Ped bike, I think, is over 230 million. So show those in there on the table. And then, when all the dust settles and we come down to the total numbers, let's just show a percentage by mode of the total funding. You know, I know we try to do that before we added the new money, but at the end of the day, it should say by mode, here's the percentage for each scenario. Does that make sense?
Excluding carbon and bridge or including?
Just put the whole thing together. If we're
Yeah.
saying fund this set of projects, here's the total amount of money we're funding, just put that percentage by mode.
Understood.
Thank you very much.
Got it. Thanks.
All right, Adam.
Thanks. I think someone made this observation earlier between these three scenarios, and that we're really kind of nibbling around the edges. And my initial reaction to this was B1 makes sense to me in the environment that we're in now. But if we're going to be adding other projects to it to kind of blend B1 and B2, I'm fine with that. And I'm actually more interested in what Matt Fighton thinks. I think he had his hand raised before me, so I'll defer to him. Thanks.
Okay. I'm gonna go to Aaron first and then over to Matt.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm getting in the weeds on projects, I know, but I wanted to offer under PED facilities, we have our 140th PED overpass funded by carbon reduction. That is a lesser priority of a project for us than the 42 roadway project, which that 42 roadway project is all about mobility and moving cars faster, and it also includes a PED overpass on that as well. So there is, a lot of benefit to that project that could be justified with that carbon reduction funds.
All right, thanks, Aaron. All right, Matt, your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just as a general statement, I'd say STA, we're most supportive of the midpoint scenario as is. We do understand that there's going to be discussion around that lowest scoring transit project in that category. I appreciate Elaine's comments as it relates to, I think that's kind of a narrow view of just looking at one category. So I hope that's considered by TAB if looking at that scenario. I'll just state that as in terms of the transit projects, I think it's easy to just look at the category and sit there and say that it's, there's some pretty lower scoring projects, but I'll just say as a general statement around transit, you'll see it's relatively few projects ultimately proposed by providers. I guess I would just make the statement that in transit, we're generally proposing projects that we know that we can provide and implement. So really really more of a quality over quantity. So I get a little concerned when there's discussion around just looking at a score and saying that this project doesn't provide value, because from the STA perspective, and I'm sure, I would hope Adam would echo it on the Metro Transit side, that all the projects we provide would provide great value. So, we understand that there's going to be discussion around that project. We're understanding of that and fine for that discussion to happen. But STA is currently in favor of the midpoint as is, but could still be supportive of some of the other scenarios that have been put out today. But generally, midpoint is where we're at.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Matt. All right. I want to make sure I'm mindful of folks' times. It is 10:25. So I do want to get to something that we are looking to push more towards TAB. So I'm going to go Michael, and then I got Lisa and Lissa.
All right, thanks, John. I just thought I'd weigh in because we're looking for some feedback here. I could get on board with the B1 scenario. I think there's a way to push over programming or that leftover money, or even eliminating one of the unique projects. And I know that's a TAB decision, but to fund the $5.5 million Scott County multi-use. But I would also ask too, if that's B1 is the direction, then there's that City of Victoria project under PED facilities for $2 million. So I think if getting on with B1, I think if we're going to do Scott County, when we're shifting money towards, trails and PEDs, I would just ask that Victoria project be considered. But also to get back to previous comment, I think it was by Charlie. That leaves, I think that the two big projects in strategic capacity for $10 million each unfunded. And I do agree. If you don't get the first money in here, how are you going to fund a $30 to $60 million project, let's say? But all that aside, I could get on with B1 with the Scott County and the city of Victoria being shifted over. That's all I got.
All right, thank you, Michael. Lisa?
Sorry, I couldn't find my unmute button. Just to kind of follow up on Elaine's comment, I mean, there has been some discussion at certain levels about how projects score, and there are a few low scoring projects that are the way that we're drawing these lines that sometimes get funded. But I think if you look at bike and ped and highway projects, we don't dig clear down into those lower scores for the most part. I mean, there's maybe that one exception with the Victoria project. But that is a concern. They all have the same amount of points to begin with, and we have some projects that are just not scoring that well. I know we can't change the rules now, but that maybe ought to be something that's thought about in the future regarding scores of projects. And nobody wanted to change the rules in the middle of it, but we can also think about how we draw funding lines.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. Lisa?
I'm gonna make a motion to get rid of B2 and shift or use some of that over programming to make that B1 scenario basically the BC closer to B2 and what those projects are funding. I don't know. I'm struggling here a little bit on making a motion without like a super strong motion on an exact scenario without knowing how all these pieces. So I don't know how specific people want me to be on this one, particularly now with what Michael brought up about that Victoria project. But generally make a motion to get rid of B2 and then shift or utilize over programming to fund the additional multi-use trail and pedestrian projects in B2 or in the B1 scenario.
Listen, maybe I can go a little bit with this. So if we utilize the depending upon the category, and so we can leave that open, whether that's A or B1, but there is in scenario B1, there's 3.5 million that is yet to be allocated. 700,000 in unique projects, so that's 4.2, and at 11%. If we go to 12%, we're at approximately 7.2. I think that would get us to the hump that has been described as funding the Scott County project and the Victoria project, so that we would have two very distinct scenarios for TAB to look at. If folks are in agreement on that, and I don't know that we need a motion on that. Steve, thoughts?
Yeah. I appreciate Alyssa putting something out there. That actually is pretty helpful. But to do that, there's two ways I think that I've heard today that you could fund that in B1, the Scott County project. One, you put the extra over programming in B1 to get to the Dakota County reconstruction project, and then you remove some level of probably pedestrian facilities projects to fund Scott County. I've heard a few people say that too, so that I think there's kind of two ways you could get there. One is put the over programming in B1 towards that Scott County Trail project, or kind of mix and match the carbon reduction money slightly differently to generate that 5.5 million. So I heard a few people on each side of that today, and at least in my notes. But and to the broader question, I think we would probably we'll likely want to bring all of them back, all these three scenarios back, or iterations of them. But if there's a preference for one or two from TAC, that would be good information too. But I think we wouldn't kind of cross one of them out per se, just because we told TAB would come back with everything with comments. But I think if there's a motion or a straw poll that people like one or two of them better than another one, that's good. That's good information too. So.
Okay, so you'd be okay with just a straw poll there, but I think what I'm hearing, at least from TAC, is we need a differentiator much more than just having these kind of three scenarios.
I'd second Lissa's motion, Mr. Chair.
Okay. All right. So just to clarify, that's putting it into the bike ped.
Yeah, Tab.
Specifically.
I want to be clear here. Tab asked to bring these things back, and to me, that's not explicitly bring them to them. It's to bring, their ideas through the committee process.
Yep.
So I am okay with not showing Tab these three things. If they, you keep the information in the back pocket. To me, it's our job as staff to hear what Tab says, present the information to us, and we keep narrowing it down for them. I don't think it's our job to hand them one thing on a platter. This is a policy decision. But I don't want to keep showing them three things. I think that's honestly fairly irresponsible as staff to do that for them, because they're just going to keep having these same round and round conversations. So whether it needs to be an official motion, whether it's everybody concurring that we're dropping one, but I don't have an issue, and others speak up, if Tab never sees B2. Now, if they're asking questions about a B2, then I think that's where you speak up and say, TAC saw B2 and they narrowed it by combining a bunch of stuff, so it's damn near the same as B1. I don't know. I just don't think they need to see all three of these.
All right, Lissa. All right, we do have, I just want to be respectful of the fact that we have a motion and a second in front of us. I want to clarify what that motion is, though.
Yep.
So if I can have either Lissa or Brian maybe clarify that for everybody, as we understand what we're doing. We're dropping B2, and any additional over programming would then be utilized in the B1 scenario. We're not, and maybe I'll just leave it at that. I'll leave that motion at that. And so I don't know that, well, it's a motion and a second in front of us. So with that, is there any further discussion from the group?
My question is, could that be broken into two different motions?
Just eliminate B2 first.
Because there's two things in that motion.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we can let's do this. Simplify for everybody. The first motion, as I understood from Lissa, if you wouldn't mind amending your motion to just drop B2.
I apologize making this complicated, but I don't want to drop B2 unless that money is it sounds like that the votes will go that way. So I will do it out of good faith, but I'm only okay dropping B2 if the money gets shifted to those categories in B1 as we've discussed. That's why these two things are linked to me.
That makes sense. Yep. I withdraw mine.
Right. So that's clarification. It is one motion. All right, moving forward. It looks like Lyndon, you have your comment, hand up.
Yeah. I'm a little uncomfortable about voting yet, but you mentioned the over programming would go to B1. Can't we also do a over programming for the other scenario? Is that not on the table? Okay.
One at a time.
Yeah, and then the other question was back to Dakota County. I mean, I just see that, to Steve's point, there's another option here where Dakota quite clearly said that PED project wasn't as high a priority as their road project. So there still needs to be some discussion on the semantics of the PED projects versus road under B2, B1.
And I just want to make sure we're look at where that one is.
Yeah, so Joe, go up a little bit on your screen here. I'm not sure everybody's tracking what we're talking about here.
Yeah, Steve, if you don't mind, I want to point out a couple things that are happening in the chat, because we have to be really careful with the chat since people might be watching this online. So there are some questions about the Victoria project, and that's why I'm down here. I want to make sure people are clear that we're talking about this project here, because Victoria did actually sponsor one or two other projects. So the Victoria project is this 10th reg project in pedestrian facilities, and that wasn't 100% clear. And right now that's shown only in midpoint A. I just wanted to make sure to point that out. And I want to kind of get out some of the things in the chat.
Thank you for that clarification, Joe.
And that's it. That's all I have, Steve. Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, do you want to go to that Lyndon's question on that? What was it? Reconstruction project in Dakota County. Let's just kind of point out where that is for folks, just so we can.
I don't know where it is, so.
So that's page 6.
Zoom in a little bit. It's the next one in B1 and B2.
This little sharing thing is not allowing me to zoom in. The little.
Yeah, I know.
WebEx is really messing with me right now.
So it's a 6.5 million requested for
county road. What ranking are we talking about here?
Well,
right here.
It's right underneath the Waconia. Right underneath the Waconia project.
Okay, so it's the 18th project.
There it is.
Yeah. Yep.
This is Lissa. I mean,
thank you, Dan. Go
ahead, Lissa.
Typical that applicants can basically say that, no offense to Dakota County here, but I mean, if you want to drop a project out of this, then like make a motion to completely pull a project out of the situation. I don't think it's in our purview to, I mean, I understand and respect where you're going here. But you know, we're also talking about moving money from a bike ped thing to a bike, you know, in the bike ped category, not flipping it up into roadway. And so if you want, I don't know, I just feel really uncomfortable for us as TAC, unless a project is completely dropped out of this mix, to kind of pick and choose based on applicants. Because I think every one of us here probably would state different things about what their priorities are.
Thank you, Lisa. And I think to that point, this is more of a discussion to go to TAC that if we might recognize from TAC's perspective that not every entity that has submitted more than one project is getting their top priority. And so that they can entertain that discussion. That's on them. I'm starting to get a little uncomfortable with the idea that we're picking versus eliminating B2 and saying, okay, by eliminating B2 over programming, we're suggesting, you know, it can go to one of these two areas. I think would be probably the strongest recommendation, because now they're down to 2, because we're not making a decision. We're just giving information to them to consider. So eliminate B2. If you over program, now B1 can address bike ped or more roadways, and they'll have that discussion for hours. But it's down to 2.
Can I'd like to point out too that B2, oh, I'm sorry. We're saying B2 gets eliminated. Is that the vote?
That was essentially the recommendation that the funding stay more, the over programming stay within, I think, the bike ped scenario, with the discussion that ensued regarding where those fit.
Even though TAB asked for this, that was my concern. Okay.
Yep. We are a technical committee. They can disregard our comments if they choose and go to a 6-hour discussion.
So, Mr. Chair, this is Joe. I just want to clarify too. So the motion is if and only if additional over programming is allowed, right?
That's what it sounds like. I would take the scenario as that's the only way it would be acceptable to the proposer of the motion.
So both stay unless over programming is allowed. And then to Lyndon's point, at that point, if that's approved, then over programming should be allowed with the midpoint scenario as well.
Yep. That's the way I take it.
And I am open, once again, we potentially should have had this meeting in person. I'll just say that, because this is really challenging. You know, is the better situation here for me to remove this motion and for us just globally, because I do think TAC generally, of everybody who has spoken up, or while the different projects are up for debate, but are generally in concurrence, and people correct me if I'm wrong, that we're okay removing B1 and we should move so I'm sorry, we're okay with removing B2, but want to direct staff to make B1 using over programming and the little bit of funds we have left here and there to fund those additional trail projects. And then also do something similar with A, is using, bringing that over programming up to do some of these things that were discussed. Is that the better way, and are people more comfortable if this isn't an official motion, but a general like TAC directing staff to do these things? Because I am sensing there's some people a little bit uncomfortable since we are not, unless we see all of this played out in these spreadsheets, I don't want to put anybody in a position of being uncomfortable voting on this motion.
Steve?
I was just tracking Lissa, but I think her general concept of narrowing down is good. We'd probably put if we want to do that to B2, I think, Elaine's we're kind of hedging like, we'll probably have to kind of cross it out or do something else, but it would still kind of flow with the packet, but we would cross it out in some manner. And I think that's what I'm feeling from Elaine a little bit here too. I think narrowing it down is good. I mean, there's no doubt about that to get to a decision here because there's no clear-cut winner. So we could, we could
Steve,
show
I'm
kind of
wondering
clearly
if we tabled that motion and then voted first, had a discussion about over programming, that we believe over programming is appropriate. That would set the table then for, let's say, your motion that would allow the over programming. We wouldn't have to worry about that because over programming would be recommended for the scenarios. And then A and B1 would go forward with maybe a line through B2 to tab or a different color or something.
I think that would, well, Elaine, I think something like that would work, don't you think, from kind of what we've heard from tab?
Well, that could be a vote. I mean, for me, I haven't heard anything from tab to add more over programming. So I have to vote based on what I've heard tab recommendations.
Yeah, just to, B2, Mr. Chair, from a technical perspective, the ped bike, before the carbon ad is over the maximum modal range anyway. So to me, it's a technically flawed scenario anyway. So, I'd approve just getting rid of it.
Okay. And so back to this discussion where we're at, and I think we got a little bit sideways because we have a motion instead of we're just recommending based on the discussion to move forward. But I do want to hold true to that. So at this point, I think it'd be good to talk about over programming first. So if I had a motion to table Lissa's.
I can table it.
Okay.
Is it easier just to remove it?
Yeah, she'd have to withdraw it. We can't table it.
Now that it's already there, we either have to vote on it or table it. So because we have to make an action on the motion in the second.
I can make a motion to table.
Okay. Is there a second? I'll second it. It's tabled. So I mean, this is the little bit of trying to do Robert's rules and not do Robert's rules. All right. So I think the first part then I want to move to then is over programming. Is TAC in support of going to a 12% and utilizing any unspent funds to further develop scenarios? And so that's the question that's out there. So I'll make a motion that we do over program up to 12% and utilize the unprogrammed funds for potential consideration from tab. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, we got a second. All right, everybody, we got a motion and a second to move forward to a recommendation to tab to utilize over programming to 12% and any unprogrammed funds in current scenarios. All right, Joe, you want to go ahead and run that for me? All those in favor say aye.
Okay, McPherson,
Aye.
Robgent,
Aye.
Labrie,
Aye.
Ellos,
Aye.
Isaacson,
Aye.
Freeze,
Aye.
Leitner,
Aye.
Witter,
Aye.
Otsukos,
Nay.
Peterson,
I'll abstain.
Larson,
I'll abstain too.
Harrington. Did he leave? Did you leave? Solberg.
I think you did.
Aye.
IO. Innocent. He left. Fighton.
I'll abstain.
Reef.
Aye.
Ed Parthy, I don't think you're here. Eddie's not here. McCullough.
Aye.
Keel.
Aye.
I believe Howley left. Ellis.
Aye.
Brodhag.
Aye.
Ashfeld.
Aye.
Thompson.
I'm an aye, but I'm just maybe a question for the chair after the vote. I mean, what is the reasoning for the abstention? Shouldn't people be voting aye or nay? But my vote is aye.
All right. Beckwith.
Aye.
As an aside, Ross, you got thrown into quite a meeting. Hager.
Aye.
Vol. Vol might have left. I think he did. Kurtz. Uh-oh. Also left. And Dermody. All right. We have 19 votes. That's still a quorum.
Joe, I'm here.
Okay.
Yeah, I was muted.
No problem. Do you have a vote?
Yes, I will vote aye.
Thank you.
All right, what do we got, Joe?
Enough votes, and the ayes have it. We have 1, 2, 3 abstentions, 1 no, and enough ayes to beat that pretty handily.
All right, thank you. So that moves is something TAC is recommending to TAB that we utilize 12% over programming and the additional unallocated funds in the scenario. So now we got that set. Now, what I would prefer here from folks is if we can move forward to pick up Lissa's that would her motion, whether it passes or fails, is a signal to TAB. Okay. And to say the removal of B2 and Lissa, if I can have you pick that up again.
This is Lissa. I will make a motion to remove B2 and utilize that over programming in the previous vote to reflect the sentiment of B2 in the B1.
All right. Perfect. Is there a second?
So second.
All right. So we have a motion and a second in front of us again to remove B2 for consideration from TAC to TAB and to utilize over programming to continue the sentiment of supporting bike head as indicated in the B2 scenario. Any further discussion?
Yeah, Mr. Chair,
Yes.
come back here. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Joe.
I'm just going to ask, I'm just looking through the chat here and some of the comments. Lisa Freeze brought up a comment. I think it's a valid comment to discuss. So in the ped bike modal ranges there, when you look at the bottom carbon reduction project total for the midpoint and then B1, the proposed total was 15.3 roughly, but then for B2, it was at 18.6. The question was in the chat there, could you also utilize that higher dollar value, the 18.6 of carbon reduction program to go further down the line?
Steve, that's a question for you.
Yeah, Mr. Chair and Joe, I think the answer is no to that. That was one of the clarifications we put out with when we reposted the tables was we didn't have one of the last projects in the mix, and that's why it's over programmed. But when you kind of bring it forward to that first table that shows kind of all the funding sources all together, that's where we were coming up with, 2.3 million available for, in this case, B2. But so I don't think there's extra carbon money beyond the 16 million in change. Yep.
And that will lead to our next motion, by the way. So bear with us, folks. Bear with us. Because the carbon is 22-46. So any further discussion on that motion?
Mr. Chair, this is Carl. So
ahead, Carl.
what I'm hearing the motion say is that we would use the over-programming money for more bike ped projects, from either category. And I would note that there's been discussion of 3 projects, one, the Scott County project, one, the Victoria project, which is in the ped group. And I would add to that discussion, the one that ties with the Scott County project from a score point of view, the Three Rivers one. And so to me, it would seem reasonable that we would fund both the Scott and the Three Rivers one before we would fund the Victoria one, especially considering the Victoria one has a somewhat of a score gap between the next funded project.
And I'm going to say I am not, from tax perspective, I want to get out of the project specific and say we're going to fund, we want that to stay in bike ped. I can comment, Steve can comment that TAC is typically not like to see ties, but we also recognize that scenario, right, that there is one that fits the current fiscal constraints that would leave a tie if that's acceptable to TAC as a whole.
John, that matches what I
Go
was.
ahead, Lisa.
What you just described matches my motion. I don't want to get into where the projects, but the motion is to use that over programming that we just voted on to reflect in that, to be put into the bike. The to make B2, B1 look like B2.
Okay. Chad, you have a comment?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. This is maybe for Alyssa and the group here. The way I'm seeing this is we are merging B1 and B2 together to create maybe a B scenario. Like, I think it's just confusing to me to delete one and add to the other when we're really just kind of merging and doing all the projects in both those scenarios. So I don't know if that would be clearer to staff, or I realize that's not in the motion, but wanted to put that out before we vote on this motion for discussion.
Again,
It also includes an additional resources for additional projects beyond what are included in B1 and B2, right?
and could these be separated votes versus it's the combining that makes it confusing?
So here's my question. Like, and this is me not being on this committee for as long as many of you others, do we need to take a vote here? Can we just generally, by, like John, you were saying, straw poll vote? Are people in general agreement that B2 should have an X through it and A and B1 should be the ones going forward, and then directing staff to use the over programming to add to those A and B1 based on what we've been talking about? Is that simpler for us to just do the straw vote? That's generally what people are feeling, as opposed to a super official motion that's making, I think, some people feel uncomfortable because they don't see, because we haven't obviously seen on paper what that actually is.
I think we need to do votes.
Say that again.
From my perspective, in order for an action to come, I mean, there has to be a vote so that staff knows.
Yeah, John, if I could jump on, I would agree. I think scenarios B1 and B2 are so similar that we should almost have the midpoint, more focused on roads with a little extra bike ped, and then this bike ped heavy. So I think there's an easy way here by moving forward with this motion to kind of narrow it down to 2 scenarios that TAB can discuss through, because there's some people that want more bike ped and others that want more roads. And I think I'll give them 2 distinct options, but I think B2 should go, and I think we're moving in the right direction.
Okay. Thank you, Michael. Anybody?
Mr. Chair, I have a question.
Go ahead, Brian.
So when we talk about what's going to be given to TAB, I think I'm hearing people say that it will look like this, but we'll have an X through what is the orange column at this point. Is that what I'm hearing?
I think that's what I heard that Elaine would like to see is from Elaine, from the direction she received, it would be the 3. But I think we want to make it clear from TAC that we favor just 2 scenarios and what those 2 scenarios would involve, i.e. overprogramming, allocation of dollars. One maybe more towards bike ped, one maybe more towards roadways.
So,
right. Just for clarity's sake, we're saying that because TAB told us 3 scenarios, or is there some other reason?
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, my impression is we didn't, sometimes in the past we've just forwarded all the scenarios, sometimes with a preference, sometimes without. I think Elaine and I are showing a little hesitancy of completely kind of removing it. But if it's in the packet materials in some form, I think that, because Tab didn't tell us to get rid of a scenario, and generally we've relied on Tab to kind of add new scenarios or delete full scenarios. Wouldn't you say, Elaine?
yeah, and they did polling. Yeah, so they actually polled the members because it was an information item. They couldn't vote on it. That was on what they wanted to see brought back. So if we bring back only 2, there'll be question, where is the other scenario we asked for? And then they'll be trying to create one on the fly.
Okay.
I think you can achieve the same aims, right, by some sort of crossing out or.
Yeah. I think
I think you're still getting the same place here.
With a narrative of with TAC's
Yep.
description of what has occurred at TAC, and really seeing that there were no significant differences between B1 and B2. TAC may have, well, at that time, will or will not have moved forward with the motion that's before us, and that's why you're seeing what we're seeing at TAB. And I think this is a product of exactly what we started out with, which these are not very different. And it's extremely difficult to move something forward to say it is different. It's hard to pick a scenario. So the more we differentiate them, the easier it is. Now they can have the discussion, but ultimately, if they go 51% to 49%, 51% wins. Doesn't have to be unanimous.
Yeah.
Is there an option of, okay, this is going to be odd, adding a scenario that's B, that's the merging of B1 and B2, and then recommend TAB review, vote between the A and B, and the other B1 and B2 are background information of where the new B came from.
I think there's any number of options, Elaine, and I leave it up to TAC here if we want to continue discussion on this motion, or if we are done, and then we can take up another discussion. But I have the feeling, Elaine, that TAC is going to make a little more work for you in the next couple weeks.
Next week.
Okay, I see Matt has to jump off. All right, so folks, is there any more discussion on this item?
Yeah, but so.
Yep. Steve?
My question with the motion at hand is, does the extra over programming, where does the extra over programming go in the midpoint? Let me phrase it as a question. Is the motion just related to B1 or is it both?
The motion is related to B1 only.
B1 only. Yeah.
And it is to move the over programming. Scroll up, where to go? Where's into that trail project?
Yeah.
That's got,
if I understand what you, okay.
trail project.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay. Clear on that? Any further discussion?
No.
All right, folks, all those in favor of the motion in front of us, which is a recommendation to tab for consideration. All those in favor say aye by roll call.
Mr. Chair, this is Joe Mack. Not to prolong this thing. What is the motion? What exactly is it?
All right, Lisa, can you repeat it again?
The motion is to put a giant X through B2 and move using the overprogramming that we just voted on to move or to add that Scott County Merriam Junction Regional Trail to the B1 scenario.
Okay, so everybody clear? It basically makes B2, it converts it to B1 with the overprogramming. We already made a motion earlier that you should utilize overprogramming. We did not dictate in that particular case in the midpoint where that could go. We didn't say bike ped, we didn't say anything on it. This motion now is to convert B1 effectively into B2 with the overprogramming. All right. All those in favor say aye by roll call. Joe.
McPherson.
Aye.
Robjan.
Aye.
Labrie.
Aye.
Ellos.
Aye.
Isaacson.
Aye.
Breeze.
Aye.
Leitner.
Aye.
Witter.
Aye.
Otsukos.
Nay.
Peterson.
No staff recommendation on all this, so I'm going to abstain.
Larson.
Abstain.
Harrington. IO.
You're on mute. Myself?
Solberg, go for it.
Yeah, aye.
AO, are you unmuted? We're here. Reef.
Aye.
Fighting left, I believe.
Yeah.
Koa.
Aye.
Keel.
I'll abstain. I'm unclear about where the overprogramming is going.
Howley. He's gone, actually. Ellis.
No.
Brodhag.
Aye.
Ashfeld.
Aye.
Thompson.
Aye.
Beckwith.
Aye.
Hager.
Aye.
Bowl. I think you're gone. Dermody.
Aye.
I think we still have a quorum and the ayes have it.
All right, thank you, Joe. All
I
right,
will announce, Mr. Chair, I have to tell you that with our arrangement with IT, we have to be out of here by 11:45. I think we can do it, but it's worth keeping in mind for the next chunk of the meeting.
Okay.
Right.
Joe, this is Innocent. I would abstain.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank
Do
you.
we now need a
Anderson.
motion on where to put the overprogramming on the midpoint category?
Really?
Well,
Or just leave it out for
I can bring that question before TAC here, or we can leave it at TAB's discretion. So,
Or we could ask staff to develop it for tab.
or we could ask staff to develop it for TAB. Is there a sense from TAC members here what they would like to do? In my mind, I think where we're sitting is the amount of overprogramming. You can look at that in the midpoint, extra to bike ped. I would say you can split that based on what TAB's discussion was last month, where there was a lot of discussion about bike ped and discussion on roadways, and try and make a scenario where it splits that additional overprogramming between the two, but is still heavier to bike ped.
Mr. Chair, is it safe to assume, I mean, the over programming in the midpoint is going to be 12%, similar to the B1 case, correct? Is that assumed?
The dollar amount's a little bit different based on what was left in our spreadsheets.
So we're talking about 5.2 million roughly total.
It's
Yeah,
probably somewhere in that vicinity.
Or is there more bridge money available than that, Steve?
Well, there's another 2-point-some million, but I'm not sure that's on the table either. I mean, whether we could use that money for non-bridge projects and then kind of repay next cycle or not, I think I'd have to get some clarity on that.
Well,
so I think
for TAC members, I think we've already said the over programming, so that's a dollar amount. If there's an intention towards a specific area, we could go there, or we can just again, and this one, as we're staying away from the motions. Let's stay away from the motions. This is direction towards staff to develop the scenario. And if we can land on something through kind of a general consensus, I'd be happy with that. Or
yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Chair. So I think, I mean, just playing out the two options, you either get one more traffic management technology and spot mobility project, or you get one more multi-use trail project. That's how much money is available. So those are the two. That's kind of the two options on the table. One you split it between two projects and roadways, the traffic management technology and spot mobility, or you shift it over to bike ped and you get one more multi-use trail project.
Okay, TAC, hearing that. Any discussion, again, keeping in mind trying to narrow down options for TAB?
Mr. Chair, Chad.
Go ahead, Chad.
Yeah, I think I like your explanation if it could be split between the two groups. So challenge staff to see if you can do a trail project and a management technology project potentially, or whatever the lower one is.
Okay.
Not sure. I'd have to add that up, but it's close, but it's probably another. So I think there's a few different options there. Thanks.
Okay. All right. So from that perspective, I'm hearing a bit of, again, the idea that TAB was undecided on how much goes to each one would be trying to share some of that additional funding between roadways and bike ped. Is there any other thoughts on that?
Yes, this is Aaron. Could that transit money be coupled with that to fund a bigger project? The $3 million?
Well, right now the transit is in that additional project, right? Is that what you're talking about? The
three, yeah, wasn't it split between a traffic management project and spot mobility?
Can you answer that?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'm not sure I fully understand the question, to tell you the truth.
So my understanding was there's $3 million in transit money that was supposed to be funding other projects. Was it specifically dedicated to a certain category?
Okay, now I understand. Yeah, so in the midpoint scenario, we shifted the remainder in transit over to bike ped.
And that was at TAB's direction.
Yep, it says midpoint plus extra to bike ped. So what amount? It was actually $4 million, so it's a little bit higher in that scenario, and that all got put into the bike ped area.
The bike ped
Aaron,
categories or the bike ped?
Mr. Chair and members, so That was added to the funding available on bike ped. Not sure we could trace it to a specific project.
Oh,
It
okay,
was added to the pot in bike ped.
okay.
Okay. Any other discussion on this?
Mr. Chair,
Discussion, and maybe more of it go towards roadways, more towards bike ped. There's two effectively two bike ped heavy scenarios. Midpoint with extra going to bike ped, and then whatever has to be done with this over programming. And the other one that we just recommended was really bike ped heavy plus extra to roadway plus over programming to bike ped. So maybe that evens out. I'm not sure. So think about those categories there. Any additional thoughts on where over programming might go with the midpoint? I've heard my comment and Chad's about sharing that across roadway and bike ped.
Yeah, I'd like to see it in the roadway category, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Others thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, could you just present it to tab with roadway and then a split option so they can have some things to look at?
We could.
Okay. Thank you, Michael.
Mr. Chair, this is Joe Mack. I agree with Lyndon.
Okay, roadways. Others?
This is
Mr.
Aaron.
Chair,
Oh, Aaron, go ahead. And then I'll come back to you, Innocent.
Yes, I agree. Put it in roadways.
Okay, thank you. Innocent?
Mr. Chair, I would prefer bike ped.
Okay. Bike ped. Others?
Mr. Chair, just to follow up, I think there may be a little extra carbon funding available as well. Maybe that could go into the bike ped to help that project.
Okay. All right, so I am kind of hearing just a general 50-50 split on this, with maybe more emphasis on roadway, and if there's the ability to do carbon, and we're going to get to that, that could go to bike ped. So Steve, I know that isn't great direction, but does that help?
It does, yep.
Okay. All right. I mean, we've given direction to tab now and the differences and from technical feedback. I don't know that we need a motion on 2245 based on the motions we've already made and voted on. Do you feel the same way, Steve or Elaine?
Yeah, from I'm gathering, it's just my interpretation is have staff come up with a couple different scenarios or options of where they could put that extra money. It's at this point to vote on it. It's voting on a idea.
Right. Yeah. I think what you're hearing though is there's maybe a little bit more tendency towards the roadway. And in part, a second part of that is if there's additional carbon, that would go towards bike ped.
Okay.
Okay, so I would like to move on to action transmittal 22-46, which is the carbon program. Recommend, so really that's really the carbon funding where you had seen it in the scenarios. And I think there was a question that was brought up during TAC exec that I'm gonna try and bring attention to here for TAC members. And that number one is really this idea of, is there an ability for the Met Council to look to spend additional beyond the 2-year allocation of carbon funds? And so there's kind of a two-part, if you will, caveat to that. Currently, there's the 2 years that have been allocated towards the regional solicitation, approximately $8 million per year. The department, transportation, through IIJA is required to develop a carbon reduction strategy by November of 23. And that then lays out the framework for how carbon funds, or what is eligible, what are the parameters of carbon within the state of Minnesota. The department did request that Met Council only program the first 2 years because they needed to move forward with that, but did not require the Met Council to only program 2 years. Met Council, I think not only TAB, but the Transportation Committee recommended for the regional solicitation to only program 2 years of carbon funds. So that's kind of how we got to the 2 years. Is that a requirement? It is not. The Met Council, the carbon funds are sub-allocated to the council, and they can do as they wish with the funds. It was a request from MnDOT to the council to hold off. So, so there is a bit of background to these carbon funds. And so that's why you see the scenario that's in front of you with the 16 million thereabouts programmed in carbon. And I've heard some, as we go through this, additional desire, I guess, if you will, to program some bike peds. So TAC could have a discussion if we would like TAB to reconsider, as well as the Transportation Committee to reconsider only programming 2 years. That's a possibility. Doesn't mean they would be granted, or that they would move forward with it. But I want to make sure that everybody's aware of that as this discussion for this motion to move the carbon program funding options forward. So Steve, you want to run us through quick?
Yeah, I think Mr. Chair, you covered it pretty well here. You know, if I have anything else to add other than with it being a new funding source, that's why we got the council involved, because it's not outlined in our MOU for how to distribute that money, whether through the solicitation or another process. And so that's why we sought some direction from the council on the 2 years. So that's all I would add on that. Thanks.
Okay. So
you're talking about TAB or the Met Council?
Go ahead, Lyndon. Sorry, I spoke.
I'm sorry. Are you talking about the Met Council itself or TAB, Steve?
We got input from TAB, but what I'm talking about is the full Met Council. We have an MPO with MnDOT that outlines how some of the federal funds are, what process they go through for distribution. Carbon reduction isn't outlined in that MOU. TAB can't sign the MOU as a part, as the type of body it is, can't be privy to that. So that's why the council a little bit more involved in this one, I'd say, than STP and CMAQ, which have kind of are already written up kind of how we distribute that and who decides and when. But we did, you know, TAB was part of it too. TAB, we brought this to TAB. TAB said certainly put it in the bike ped, and we talked a little bit about the 2 years, but then brought the Transportation Committee too. We talked shortly a few days later, brought it to them.
Okay. Any other questions on that? I see 25-minute warning. Got it. So really what we're being asked here in 2246 is to forward the carbon reduction funding options, which based on what we've done doesn't change anything in B2, because that'll be X'd out for consideration. I mean, as far as the orange, the green would still fund the same projects that are in your documentation for TAC today. So with that, seeing it's not a specific change, I'd entertain a motion to recommend the options moving forward to tab.
So moved.
All right, we got a motion by Brian. Is there a second?
Seconded, Innocent.
Second by Innocent. All right, folks, we have a motion and a second in front of us to recommend the carbon reduction program funding options to tab. And with that, any further discussion? Not seeing or hearing any. All those in favor say aye by roll call. Joe?
McPherson.
Aye.
Robjent.
Aye.
Labrie.
Aye.
Ellos.
Aye.
Isaacson.
Aye.
Freeze.
Aye.
Leitner.
Aye.
Witter.
Aye.
Otsukos.
Aye.
Peterson.
Aye.
Larson.
Aye.
Solberg.
Aye.
AO.
Aye.
Reef, you might have left. I don't remember who left. Fighting. McCullough.
Aye.
Keel.
Aye.
Howley. Ellis.
Aye.
Brodhag.
Aye.
Ashfeld.
Aye.
Thompson.
Aye.
Beckwith.
Aye.
Hager.
Aye.
Cole is gone. Dermody.
Aye.
That is 22 ayes.
Thank you, Joe. All right, that moves forward to tab in here in a couple weeks. Moving on to 22-47, which is the HSIP program. Steve? Or who's going through that?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So I don't believe this changed much since last time you saw it. Funding and programming and this group did give us direction that they didn't want to fund projects out. We didn't want to use both funding sources to fund projects that applied in both. So that's kind of I think a key point moving forward is this group and F&P to clarify, can you apply for both? Can you win both? Can you double dip? Can you not? So that's more future oriented here, but I think the good thing is we're getting a lot more HSIP projects on the street with the IIJ. Yeah, significant increase, really. Almost a doubling of over a doubling of the money. So a lot of good small scale safety projects going out.
Okay, all right. Folks have any questions for Steve on the HSIP projects? Any discussion? This is the same list. Essentially, I think we saw.
Can carbon dollars be used to help HSIP projects?
Mr. Chair and members, most of them, I would say no. There may be some bike pad projects in this list that you could say could be yes, but most of the roadway projects aren't eligible except for some ITS type projects and congestion pricing, things like that. So I would say for the most part, no, unless it's a bike ped specific project, which there were some in here.
Okay. And I think that's part of what the carbon strategy would help lay out too, Lyndon. There is a very specific project type list that came out from FHWA on carbon. I don't know that that's the be all end all, but it's very similar to the types of projects that Met Council that we already do through the TAB process, through the bike ped trails, and in some case the ITS side. That's not so specific to safety.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion to move these projects.
Go ahead, Michael.
To move these projects forward as part of the 24 to 27 TIP.
All right, thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, got a second by Brian. All right, folks, we have a motion and a second in front of us to recommend TAB approve the attached 38 projects for funding through the Highway Safety Improvement Program. Solicitation and inclusion of all the urbanized area projects in draft 24 to 27 tip.
I have
Discussion.
a question. This
Oh,
is Lisa.
Yep, we have motion and second. We're open for discussion. Lisa?
I just was kind of wondering, I know that MnDOT has their own allocation of HSIP, and I was just curious about how much that increased with the reauthorization bill, because I also kind of observed that there's a greater percentage maybe of MnDOT projects getting funded here, and so you know, the one thing that keeps coming up is MnDOT doesn't have enough money to match it unless the legislature comes up with money. So just kind of curious about that balancing act.
Yeah, Lisa, this is Michael, the chair of FNP. So this came up at our FNP meeting, and Molly and MnDOT, they've agreed to hold a workshop or whatever you want to call it. So this theme came up at our meeting as well. So Molly said they were willing to talk about historical numbers and then get more into their program. And so I think there's room for discussion there, is kind of what I heard from MnDOT.
But I guess the part I was thinking about too, as we're trying to shuffle the deck, if a couple of these projects could go into MnDOT's program, then perhaps one of those projects that were funded on the other side that was kind of on the bubble or whatever between the two programs, maybe that's an option. That was just my observation.
Okay. Thank you, Lisa. And I think I understand that there's, maybe about a 20% increase for MnDOT HSIP. So that gives a number. As far as pulling projects or reducing that, I think there's and I'll go into the state's ability to match right now is maybe somewhat limited on a temporary basis due to the legislature. But as a department, I don't think we expect that to go beyond this session. And with that, I'll say we don't question too many others on their ability to match projects. So with that, I would leave it and say this is a good discussion for Molly and Metro District to have with project partners about how they utilize and how they apply for funds for HSIP in the future. Much like we've talked about for the regular regional solicitation. Other discussion on this topic? Otherwise, I'd entertain.
This is Lyndon. Yeah, I thank you for that. I'm glad there's going to be a discussion about this because, to be honest, we didn't know in our county that MnDOT was submitting the HSIP projects. So it would be nice to have that discussion.
Yep.
Okay. So, and the other question I have, Mr. Joe, just to clarify, if for some reason TAB decides to pick a regional solicitation scenario that doesn't include a project that's in both, can we go back to the HSIP list? Because I know there's a couple projects that are supposedly funded in regional solicitation. If that doesn't happen, can they get the money that they should have got out of HSIP?
Steve, you want to approach that one?
Yeah.
15-minute warning.
Mr. Chair, remember, so hence the reason for the need more clarity on the rule moving forward. So we had two projects that applied in both and were scored high enough to be funded in both programs. One of them was a City of Shakopee, Marystown Road project and reconstruction. Project number 2 was a Carver County spot mobility project. Both of them currently are shown funded in the solicitation. It's up, probably a choice the applicant, I'm guessing, has whether they want to take the HSIP money or the solicitation. In both cases, the solicitation was a higher amount. So what would happen if Carver County or Shakopee opted to take the lower HSIP amount is a fair question, right, John?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think It's not a good answer, I don't think, for you, Lyndon. Unfortunately, I recognize the difference in those two projects that were submitted. Maybe that's goes with the additional discussion on this for TAC, Steve, that you know we do have a project in HSIP. And there might be other ways to solve it outside the regional solicitation, and maybe if I can, we can talk about, is there an ability to program some additional dollars that might cover that with MnDOT, and that goes back to a whole nother discussion. But I think for TAB, what we would want them to know is simply the fact that there is a project that was taken out of HSIP because it was believed to potentially be funded in the regional solicitation, and they can entertain that discussion whether that's appropriate or not. And I'm happy to bring that up, Lyndon, because I think that's the details behind these lists, and then ultimately that kind of leads to, I'm sure, a discussion about any changes that need to be made in the program, or is it okay if they double dip? So, all right. Any further discussion on the motion in front of us? Lisa, your hand's up. Is that old or?
It's old.
Okay. All right. We are quickly running out of people here. So with that in mind, all those in favor of the motion in front of us to recommend that TAB approve the HSIP program and for inclusion into the 24 through 27 STIP, please say aye by roll call. Joe?
McPherson.
Aye.
Robgent.
Aye.
Labrie.
Aye.
Ellos.
Aye.
Isaacson.
Aye.
Freeze.
Aye.
Leitner.
Aye.
Witter.
Aye.
Otsukos.
Aye.
Peterson. I didn't hear that. Peterson, did you respond?
Aye. Aye.
That's only one vote. Larson, I believe, left. Larson, you still here? Rat. Solberg.
Aye.
AO.
Aye.
Reef might have left. Oh boy. Keel.
Aye.
Ellis.
Aye.
Rohag.
Aye.
Ashfeld, I think, left. Thompson.
Aye.
Beckwith.
Aye.
Hager.
Aye.
Dermody.
Aye.
So it's not a question of who got more votes. It's a question of whether there was a quorum still, and there is.
Thank you, Joe. All right, motion passes. That'll move forward to TAB in 2 weeks. Final item for the day is TAC chair nomination committees. Joe, you were writing something.
Yeah.
Can we jump yet or do we not have enough people? So
I think, Mr. Chair, my thought is that why don't the people that are here meet, and if they don't feel comfortable with their groups, try to schedule another one. I'll try to jump at each of those and see what's going on. But I would suggest those who are here and have time to have a short meeting and see if they have any thoughts. And we might have to reschedule something, preferably for as soon as next week, because we don't want to drag this into December.
Right. Thank you. All right. So, folks, right, it is TAC chair nomination season as we change the bylaws, where each of the chairs are only serving 2 years instead of 3 years. Typically, we've done through the rotation. That does not necessarily have to be so, but is much appreciated through the process, just for a little continuity and understanding of whose turn it is coming up, because it has not been necessarily easy to get candidates in the past. That being said, it is, if we go by the unwritten rule, it is the city's opportunity to serve as the TAC chair for the next 2 years. And with that, what I would recommend for agencies and counties is if you can meet and provide kind of a priority of candidates that might meet it, and that might look something like we recommend candidate A, but if the cities have a candidate, we would defer. That would be very helpful for staff and myself as we move forward into next month, which we have to have a selection of a new chair prior to January, according to the bylaws. So with that, before we do our breakout, is there any other business folks have for the good of the order? Not seeing any.
Great discussion, everyone.
At this point, we will go ahead and adjourn our regular TAC meeting. And if folks can jump to the meeting that Joe set up for you and discuss for the next couple minutes your priorities for filling TAC chair. Thank you all. Good discussion.
Thanks, everybody.